There's a detail about female psychology that many men overlook. Various studies in the field of human behavior indicate that first impressions begin to form almost immediately, even before a deep conversation takes place. In a matter of seconds, our brains are already evaluating signals related to trust, respect, and security. And no, I'm not talking about a kiss or a moment of intimacy. I'm referring to something much more subtle, brief, natural physical contact. Certain forms of contact can convey reassurance or, conversely, generate discomfort. As a woman, I want to share with you what happens from the perspective of female psychology and why so many men misinterpret these signals. What you'll hear isn't meant to be a trick or a technique to manipulate anyone. It's based on principles of human behavior, nonverbal communication, and how many women experience trust within an interaction. There's a concept that few people are familiar with. Some specialists explain that trust is usually built gradually, as if there were different levels of emotional comfort. Each step represents a greater degree of security and closeness. When a woman feels comfortable with certain gestures or a certain level of physical closeness, it's usually not by chance. It's the result of how her mind has assessed the interaction up to that point. This is where many men get confused. They tend to think that all gestures have the same meaning, or that any display of closeness represents romantic interest. However, each form of contact communicates something different. A hug, holding hands, or allowing greater proximity can express different levels of trust, and not understanding this difference leads many people to send the wrong signals. In this video, we'll walk through this process step by step. We'll analyze how trust typically develops from initial contact to the signals that reflect a much stronger emotional connection. But before we get to that point, there's something fundamental you need to understand. If you misinterpret these signals or try to rush the process, you could produce the exact opposite effect of what you intend. The first thing to understand is that physical contact isn't just a bodily experience. It also involves neurological, emotional, and psychological processes. In many women, the brain automatically analyzes aspects such as the intention, respect, and security conveyed by the other person. Therefore, the same gesture can generate completely different feelings depending on the context and who performs it. Various studies on nonverbal communication have shown that people are capable of transmitting emotions solely through touch, even without using words or maintaining eye contact. Emotions such as gratitude, empathy, or affection can be perceived with much greater accuracy than we would expect by mere chance. Furthermore, some studies suggest that many women exhibit greater sensitivity in interpreting these types of emotional signals. This means that when a man makes physical contact, a woman doesn't just perceive the touch. She also unconsciously evaluates the intention behind it, the level of calm he conveys, and whether that approach inspires trust. In other words, it's not only where the contact occurs that matters, but also the manner, the timing, and the attitude with which it is made. Precisely for this reason, before discussing the different zones of trust, it was necessary to understand how this process works from a psychological perspective. Once you understand this principle, it becomes much easier to interpret the signals without falling into mistakes that can affect the connection from the start. Now that we understand how physical contact works from the perspective of female psychology, it's time to talk about the different levels of trust. These aren't absolute rules or signals that work the same for all women, but rather patterns that can help you better interpret comfort and emotional connection. Let's start with the first level, the arms and shoulders. They generally represent the most basic zone of trust. When a woman accepts brief contact on her arm or shoulder, it usually indicates that she perceives you as someone respectful and secure. This doesn't necessarily mean there's romantic attraction. In many cases, it simply reflects that she feels comfortable in your presence. This is where many men go wrong. They interpret this initial comfort as an invitation to move too quickly. In reality, the most important thing at this stage is to observe how she responds to the touch and always respect her boundaries.
Let's start with one of the most well-known signals and at the same time, one of the most misinterpreted: hair. You've probably heard the classic idea that if a woman touches her hair, she's automatically flirting. But the reality is much more complex. We adjust our hair for many reasons. Because it's in the way, because it's hot, because we're distracted, or simply out of habit. So how can you differentiate an everyday gesture from a signal that might actually reflect interest? There are three aspects that make the difference: the way the hair moves, the area that's exposed, and the eye contact that accompanies the gesture. When a woman feels genuine attraction, she usually doesn't move her hair quickly or automatically. The gesture tends to be more slow, relaxed, and natural. Her fingers run through the strands with a certain gentleness, without the conscious intention of attracting attention, but achieving it nonetheless. Evolutionary psychology offers an interesting explanation for this behavior. For thousands of years, healthy hair has been unconsciously associated with youth, health, and good physical condition. That's why, when a woman slowly plays with her hair in front of someone she's interested in, her brain may be highlighting those characteristics without her even realizing it. But there's still one detail that provides much more information. Pay attention to what happens with her neck. If, when she moves her hair aside, she leaves that area visible in a relaxed way, the meaning can change completely. The neck is one of the most vulnerable parts of the human body, and precisely for that reason, showing it is often related to a feeling of confidence and comfort. In other words, when a woman moves her hair to one side while maintaining an open posture, she's often conveying that she feels at ease with you. Some body language research has also observed that women increase these kinds of movements when talking to men they find attractive, especially if the conversation evokes positive emotions. However, there's still one essential element missing for correctly interpreting the situation: eye contact. If she simply adjusts her hair while looking at her phone, glancing around, or distracted by something else, the gesture probably doesn't have any special meaning. But when that same movement is accompanied by eye contact, even for just a few seconds, the context changes completely. It's the combination of both signals that truly deserves attention. There's another small detail that very few people analyze. Twirling a strand of hair around her finger doesn't communicate the same thing as slowly running her whole hand through it. When she repeatedly plays with a small strand, it usually reflects a mixture of nervousness, curiosity, and interest. It's as if her mind is processing emotions while trying to maintain a natural demeanor. On the other hand, when she strokes her hair with a calm and confident movement, she typically conveys greater confidence and comfort. And there's something else you should never overlook: repetition. A single gesture can mean absolutely nothing. However, when you observe that same behavior several times during a conversation, and it's accompanied by other similar signals, it ceases to be a simple coincidence and becomes a pattern. And patterns usually offer much more information than any isolated gesture. But while hair can reveal a lot, it's just the beginning. What comes next often offers even clearer signals, because there's another part of the body that reflects levels of trust, comfort, and interest in a much more obvious way. And that area is the neck.